Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of this show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Today I'm going to talk about the Abramoff scandal. I've been talking about that for a long time, but now it's really making the news. It's making the news big time. A lot of presidential press conferences. They asked the president, well, have you taken a picture with Jack Abramoff? Oh, yeah, I've taken a picture with thousands of people. I've taken a picture with you, as well as Jack Abramoff. Will you release the pictures? Absolutely not. It'll be used for political purposes. Who is Jack Abramoff? I'll give you a little background before I go in there. Jack Abramoff is a lobbyist who was one of the founders of the College Young Republicans. He goes way back. His friends were Karl Rove, Ralph Reed, who used to be in charge of the Christian Coalition, Grover Norquist, one of the big anti-tax guys. These are the people that bankrolled the conservative movement. But are they conservatives? Some are true conservatives. Jack Abramoff, that's another question. Jack Abramoff went on to become a consultant or what we call a lobbyist, and basically he was one of the best. He could get legislation through, but he was absolutely overt in giving favors to congressmen, favors to senators, wining and dining the aides, which is a story that really hasn't come out as big as it might, because in Congress or in Washington, the people who really write the legislation are not the congressmen or senators. They don't have time. It's mostly their aides. And there's an aide who's a specialist in this, specialist in that. There's a lot of aides who work directly for the committees and really write for the committee chairman. And who they know and what they're doing is very, very important to you and me, because that's what comes out in the final product. So a lot of that is done by earmarking. Earmarking is after a bill has gone through everything and it's just about to go up for the final vote, really important senators and heads of committees and so on and so forth can go to the leadership and have things added at the very, very last minute. And these are important bills, like the defense budget, funding the Iraq war, and so on and so forth. And they can put in a bill that favors the sugar industry, for instance, or an earmark at the last minute that changes the formula to calculate reimbursement for the HMOs who deal with Medicare. So these things are very, very important. They're done kind of out of sight, out of mind for the American people and the press. And next thing you know, you go to the HHS, Health and Human Services, and your formula is completely different. You're blocked out, or a favorite industry all of a sudden has a tax break that's good only for them and nobody else. So that's basically how the system works. Most Americans feel that both parties are guilty. They just did a poll, and the favorability quotient for Congress, 29%. So just about everybody else is either neutral, and most of that other group thinks that they're all in it together. So Jack Abramoff basically was the lobbyist for the Indian casino people, and he had taken a whole bunch of tribes and for all intents and purposes took them for over $80 million. It's very, very overt about that in his emails, basically insulted the Indians that he was taking money from. His assistant, or his colleague, was the former press secretary for Tom DeLay, who's the ex-majority leader of the House, who has just been kicked out or resigned temporarily, and now it's become almost permanent. So there was a whole machine there that really infested the Republicans from one end to the other. And part of that is because mostly not Abramoff personally, but Abramoff was a friend. His colleague was the former secretary or press secretary for Tom DeLay, but it was really Tom DeLay was behind it. Tom DeLay raised the money that really got both houses of Congress elected, and was friends with a lot of the conservative money raisers who were also friends with a lot of the conservative talk show hosts. So it all kind of pulled itself together. And what has Abramoff done? Well, I've gone through whole entire shows and took entire 30-minute shows just to even talk about half of what he's done. But the bottom line is, whatever he's done, he's pled guilty, and he is going to testify against other congressmen. And that is not a little deal, that is a big deal. One congressman already indicted is Mr. Ney of Ohio, head of the Administration Committee. Well, what's the House Administration Committee? That's the committee that gives out the parking spots and the offices for all the other congressmen. In fact, one of the most powerful committees of all. And he had put things into the congressional record on behalf of Abramoff, and Abramoff, the prosecutors are at the point where they're able to say there's a quid pro quo. Basically, you cannot get any politician for taking money or bribery unless they have offered a specific service for a specific act. So in the case of Ney, that was putting things into the congressional record that only benefited Abramoff. At one point, Abramoff was personally trying to take over casinos that were on boats. People would get in the casino, it would go outside of American waters, open up casinos, it was like a yacht, for a few hours, and then come back and let the gamblers off after they had taken them for their money. So that was called Sun Cruise Lines. The guy who was forced to sell Sun Cruise because of he wasn't a citizen, among other things, he started balking at what Abramoff and his partners were offering. Abramoff actually had Ney put things into the congressional record that basically accused him of being crooked and a bad guy. And then when Abramoff did take over this line, other words were put into the congressional record that said, oh, now we have honest people in charge of this business. So Ney was on junkets, he was on this, he was on that. Abramoff sponsored junkets to, for instance, the founding golf course in the world, St. Andrews, for bigwig congressmen and senators. DeLay went on those. DeLay got in a little bit of trouble with the Ethics Committee, which basically censured him and then let him off for going on these trips and not disclosing them. Also, Abramoff had his own fancy restaurant. He would hold fundraisers for his chosen congressmen and senators, these fancy restaurants. He had skyboxes at the hockey and basketball courts. He offered things to anybody he could, and a lot of people took them. So there's a lot of unease in Congress right now. And now the issue is, yes, he had contacts all over Congress. He gave things and gave gifts and gave travel to people all over not only the congressmen and senators, but their key staffers as well. But what has he done in the executive branch? Well, there's already been one indictment of the guy who worked for the budget office. His name is Safavian, and he was about to become the head of federal procurement policy. Well, what is that position? That position makes the policy for what is legal and what is not legal to buy from the government, for all government agencies, and for basically a $2 trillion worth of buying. A lot of that is labor. So at least $1 trillion worth of purchases. That's 1/12 of the entire economy. Nice person to have on your side. He was indicted for lying about his relationship to Jack Abramoff. So what is the latest? Well, there's a couple latest, but the weirdest is that the head prosecutor for Jack Abramoff, who works for the Department of Integrity for the Justice Department, was just appointed for a judgeship a couple weeks after Abramoff pled guilty and said that he would testify against other congressmen, but before he's done so. And of course, this guy is the head of this particular investigation, which the Justice Department says itself is the biggest, most important corruption investigation in recent times. So what does this mean? This means that he's not a judge yet. He's been nominated. He's still in his job. This guy is Noel Hillman, and the guy who's really got after Abramoff, Safavian, and Scanlon, and a bunch of other people, Congressman Ney, and who knows who else he has in his sights. All of a sudden, he was forced to recuse himself because now he's up for a judgeship. And they've taken the guy who had his job before him and put him in the same role, although it's not clear whether a person at that level, the person who replaced him, is going to take over the investigation. And I assume either guilty pleas or possibly trials, although these things rarely get to trial. Nobody wants to be in front of the judge and be in front of cameras and do perp walks every day like Michael Jackson. And so there'll be a lot of guilty pleadings like Safavian and Abramoff himself. But this becomes a big issue. And why is this a big issue? The issue is that two Democratic senators and a Democratic congressman, probably a political act, I have no doubt of it, have come forward and have said, look, this is obstruction of justice and interference in the investigation to come up at this time, even though they were talking about offering this guy a judgeship a whole year ago, and to come up at this time and disrupt the investigation by forcing this guy into a position where he has to recuse himself. So what do the Democrats want to do? And this is a big thing. They want a special prosecutor. Just like Fitzgerald, who's been looking into the CIA Valerie Plame investigation, to go in there and start going through everything. And this, of course, connects in with the fact that Abramoff, while he was working the Indian situation, while he was working with some Indian tribes to promote casinos, other Indian tribes to close down the casinos of their potential competitors, and then with the potential competitor Indian tribes that were trying to open up the casinos. Played every angle and collected $80 million. During Abramoff's plea, he is being fined $25 million. Some punitive and some to return to his customers, on top of a prison sentence. And of course, this length of the sentence hasn't really been determined yet, depending on how much he cooperates. So the Democrats are accusing the Justice Department and the White House of actually tampering with the investigation, and the only way to get it back online is to have a special prosecutor. Well, a special prosecutor can go through everything, look at everything. He gets a budget to try no case except for that one. And of course, the Justice Department has to try all cases, all the drug cases, all of the corruption cases, everything there is throughout the entire, that's a violation of federal law. So once you get a prosecutor, special prosecutor, and he's after whoever he's after, it never ends. And in fact, there's often investigations for obstructing the special prosecutor, which is what happened in the Fitzgerald investigation of Valerie Plame, or of the release of Valerie Plame's name, which was classified. So Basically, what the Justice Department has answered, here spokesman is Brian Roarcast, there is no legal or ethical reason why the Attorney General would need to recuse himself from this investigation as it continues to move successfully with a career prosecution team. Although the investigation has already gotten to Safavian, who works for the executive branch. Now, what's come out in the last couple of weeks is that Abramoff was a regular at the White House. We don't know who he was visiting because the White House won't release the records. We don't know what he was doing there. We do know that he went to a lot of fundraisers. He went to a lot of Hanukkah parties and Christmas parties and did grip and grin pictures with the President of the United States and who knows who else. However, we do know that there is another connection straight into the highest levels of the White House. Karl Rove's secretary, her name is Susan Ralston, is the ex-secretary of Abramoff. And it's possible that he was meeting with her or with her boss, Karl Rove himself. After all, Abramoff and Karl Rove were very, very close, and they all go all the way back to their days in the college Republicans, where they were buddies and coordinated with each other. So who was he seeing? What was he doing? But even more so, were there any gifts? Would any of the staffers in the White House attend his fundraisers, get free meals, go on trips? As bad as it is for congressmen and senators, staffers for congressmen and senators are limited to $50 gifts. It might be even worse for people in the White House. So were any of these folks on any of these junkets? Were any of these folks involved? Or did any of these folks take favors, do things, and so on and so forth? And has the Justice Department, and of course the head of the Justice Department is Gonzalez, and Gonzalez is the ex legal counsel for the president and for the presidency in the White House during the period that these visits were done. So there's a complete stonewall, and there's probably nothing to it. However, by stonewalling the presidency right now, the White House and Karl Rove and all those folks who basically create the political strategy for President Bush, are really opening themselves up, because by not coming forward, even though they know the grip and grin pictures are going to show up in Democratic ads left and right and MoveOn.org ads left and right, they're still opening themselves up to charges that something was going on and that Abramoff was onto something, that Abramoff got through to somebody. Who knows? However, we don't. And because we don't, anybody can speculate anything. And I can assure that they will. Abramoff organized at least one meeting with the White House aides for his clients. Some of the Indians and one of the tribes actually got a visit to the president through Abramoff. That's an old story, but it's a story that could come up not because the president owed him anything, or although the president's campaign has $100,000 of Abramoff's money, but because there might be a staffer under there who may have taken a favor. If that's true, then the Justice Department, because it's gone through the presidency and the White House, would almost have to support a federal prosecutor. Once the special prosecutor is on the loop, there's no stopping them. One of the special prosecutors for a cabinet-level Secretary of Housing, Cisneros, just finished his, under Clinton, probably 93, 94, just finished his investigation in 2006. And this was after he had pled guilty years and years and years ago. the investigation stayed open for all those years, all those millions of dollars. So these things kind of never end, and they're basically fishing expeditions that just go on and on and on, and there may be fire under the smoke. We don't know. We know that there's a bunch of congressmen that took a lot of favors, that are known to have taken junkets. There's congressmen staffers that are known to take junkets. We don't really know the extent, except for the Safavian incident, of Abramoff's and his organization's contacts into the White House. And step forward or sit back, because it's very, very possible that there may be a special prosecutor in this loop. If there is, that's going to go all the way to the 2008 election. It's going to affect a lot of things. What do we know about Abramoff in the White House? He raised at least $100,000 for President Bush's reelection. He definitely has had contact with former procurement chief David Safavian, been charged with lying to investigators. And of course, the regular Justice Department, more than capable of following these things through and getting convictions, which they have, or at least charging them. We know that Abramoff is a crook, and that he's been invited to staff-level meetings in the White House. How many? We don't know. McClellan, who's the spokesman, White House spokesman, said when he was questioned about it, if you've got specific issues you need to bring to my attention, fine. But we're not going to engage in a fishing expedition that has nothing to do with the investigation. White House officials, we need to know what White House officials did or didn't do, so on and so forth. Is this going to be usable for partisan politics? You bet. All the left-wing think tanks going to take pictures of grips and grin between the president and a convicted felon? Oh, yes, absolutely. However, there is a precedent for the White House releasing all records concerning fundraising with lobbyists and so on and so forth. During the 90s, the Republicans pushed a scandal between a fundraiser who had connections with the Chinese government, who raised funds for Clinton, and Clinton had to cough up. At first, the Clinton administration wouldn't give any information. However, they lost the fight, and they coughed up all the information on White House coffees, meetings, photos, videotapes, visits to the Lincoln bedroom, and so on and so forth. So is the Stonewall going to continue? Probably. Is it going to be successful? Probably not, because the Republicans themselves went after Clinton on exactly the same issue. Contacts with fundraisers inside the White House and fundraisers with shaky ethics. Now, the difference is Abramoff has already pled guilty and been convicted of felonies, and felonies involving fundraising, bribery, and so on and so forth. The White House thing didn't get that far. So, or the Clinton thing didn't get that far, and yet Clinton had to disclose all of this politically damaging stuff to his enemies. So that probably will come through. There's a couple other little wrinkles to this whole story of rampant lobbyism. The Republicans very, very cleverly, and I have to give them a lot of credit, especially David Dreyer, who is one of the Republican leaders. He used to be my congressman when I lived in California, and he is one of the most honest, forthright guys you're ever going to see. But he was put in charge of coming up with a lobbying reform proposal for the Republicans, and they brought that out just a few days after Abramoff pleaded guilty. And it really knocked Abramoff off the pages, which is good for them, for a couple days. What they didn't count on is that this other wrinkle of Abramoff's visiting the White House would come up, get right back onto, not the front pages, but the tabloids. So You're seeing stories about this on MSNBC, CNN, so on and so forth, Chris Matthews, and all these different places. And they're not backing away because I think the story is going to have legs right through the congressional elections of 2006, and that there is a special prosecutor right through to 2008. So what's gone on? The Republicans came on, said we need some restrictions on travel to congressmen, senators offered by lobbyists, on certain other things. There have been 3 proposals. The Democrats have come up with their own proposal, almost the same as a Republican, but with one change, and I believe this is either the Democrats' proposal or John McCain's proposal, to get rid of earmarks. Now, what are earmarks? As I described before, earmarks are these weird they're tacked onto bills right at the tail end. The name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is I'm a federal worker and proud of it. I believe that my time is up, but I'm not sure.